This week, we discuss what makes a good breach response. No interviews this week, but we've got a two-part news segment for you as we catch up from being off for a little bit last week. In the enterprise security news, not much funding, but Spider Oak and Hypori reinvent themselves. Thoma Bravo picks up Magnet Forensics for $1.34 billion. More layoffs. Buyers call bluff on unicorn valuations. China aims to grow its cybersecurity industry. Orca is the first security company to embed ChatGPT into its product. Credit card honey tokens. Breaches are increasingly caused by third parties. Top 5 pen test findings from 2022. Click Google-sponsored links at your own peril. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Australia Day. This is episode 303, recorded on Thursday, January 26, 2023. I wrote 2022, but it is 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler? I don't have my usual script.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I have one for you. Since you are in a weird place because you are sick, I'm going to call you the king of COVID, the genius of germs, Adrian Sanabria. There it is.
Thank you for that. That's great. I love it. I love it. Also joining me today is Sean Metcalf. How are you, Sean?
Doing good. Recovering from being at the ShmooCon conference in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. Long weekend, but a great time catching up with folks old and new and talking about all things Trimark and cybersecurity. And yeah, lots of good times. In fact, one of the things that was done in the lobby, one of the hacker shenanigans, was opening up a box of Batman cereal from, I believe, the late 80s. And some people actually ate it. I did not do that because I do not do stuff like that. But apparently, Grifter bought it off of eBay, and some people actually had some. I stayed away, and my stomach was fine.
Well, I have something funny that goes along with that. So when I was doing cybersecurity consulting for @Stake in the early 2000s, one of my very first projects was to do work for the executive office of the president. And I had to go up to DC, and I bought myself two things. I think it was 2001 or 2002. I bought myself two things. I bought myself a Christmas ornament for my Christmas tree, which was like the annual Christmas ornament that they put out. I think it was '02. And I bought myself a box of presidential M&Ms that still sit on my desk 20 years later. I'm afraid of.
Wow. I dare you to eat one right now.
I bet the M&Ms are fine. I bet they're fine.
They're candy-coated chocolate.
Good friend of mine, Travis Goodspeed, has some old cans of the 1982 World's Fair beer, and it's a tradition. Every year we open a can and drink it.
Oh my God! How does it taste?
So the carbonation's gone, the alcohol's gone. So it just tastes kind of sweet and syrupy. Like it doesn't taste like it's going to kill you. But there's a little flecks of metal floating in it, so that's probably not good. But I haven't died yet.
The alcohol is fermented in a non-alcohol.
It's gone full circle.
Yeah. Just don't drink the cans that are already half empty for some reason. If the seal has been broken. But so today's. I think it's appropriate. It's Australia today because my day's a bit topsy-turvy, a bit upside down. As you can tell, I am not coming in from my normal location, from my living room podcasting setup. I am in Santa Clara for the Usenix Enigma conference, but I am COVID positive. So they're going to be running a recording of my talk instead of me getting up on stage. And I'm hanging out here, just me and my buddy COVID in my hotel room. So I wasn't going to host today, but since I can't speak today, here I am.
Great. So are people going to knock on your door and be like, question for you?
Actually, there was, if I was a little bit more on top of it, I would be getting room service here in a moment, but I got a bit distracted onto other things. So I'm going to get some food delivered in after we finish up the podcast here. But yeah, no, I don't think anybody's going to come knocking. Maybe house cleaning. All right, for today's topic, as I mentioned in the intro, we don't have any guest interviews this week. So instead, we're going to cover a topic that I think is pretty interesting, and it's breach responses. How companies respond to breaches is definitely a hot topic for us. We discuss a lot of breaches as they occur, and we're not always 100% happy with those responses. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're just outright terrible. And I thought it would be interesting to break down what makes a good and a bad breach response. And I think it would be interesting if we could even, maybe as an output of this chat, we could put together like a scoring system for breaches, perhaps. I think that would be pretty interesting. Basically, rate somebody's breach response, or come up with maybe a checklist for companies to say, hey, are we talking about all the right things when we announce this breach?
So let me ask a quick question for you, Adrian. Breach response is an interesting topic. Don't a lot of companies try to tackle this exact question to grade their own versions of breach responses based off of tabletop exercises?
They should. Yeah, that's a good question. I've done some tabletops way in the past when I used to be a consultant. I don't know if you've done more, Sean, but I should hope, and I definitely, tell companies when I advise them about incident response, putting together their incident response plans, that this is something they should practice. A good breach response goes a long way to putting your customers' fears at rest.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's different elements of breach response. So when someone says breach response, my initial thinking is, okay, what do you do once you realize something is off? What is that first, 4, 12, 24 hours? What do you do during that time? Because that's the time that really matters the most is what happens initially. Are you pulling systems offline? You probably shouldn't. You should probably be reaching out to a quality incident response company and have them give you guidance on what to do next. You need to get legal involved. Depending on the company and the size of the company, you need to get PR involved so that you can manage communication around this. Depending on what's affected and where your company is located, there's certain regulatory and contractual requirements that you need to start implementing as far as notifications within a 24 or 48 hour period. So a lot of this has to happen pretty quickly. And to Tyler's comment, yeah, there's things that you should be prepped for even before you get in that situation with tabletops. Tabletops often come down to who handles what when, in what order are they handled, and also what are the sort of technical and process aspects that happen around that. And then there's the other side of it, which is the notification to the community, to the public, to your customers. If your organization is breached, what does that look like? How is that done? What sort of level of detail do you provide? It's complicated, but I love this topic because it's one of those things that, as we've seen, a lot of companies have not managed appropriately. And when you don't manage it appropriately, customers lose faith and they shift to a competitive product.
So my thoughts on the tabletop exercises, they just I've done one within the last year with a previous company, and every time I do one, it feels like we're just playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Like it feels like it really needs to be built and gamified into, you roll the dice, see what happens, this happens, and then you have to figure out how to handle it so that your company doesn't burn down and you die, right? Like it feels like just a really cool version of a Dungeons and Dragons game.
So it's kind of like when you get on the cruise ship and everyone has to muster and put on the life jacket, and then you just go, okay, we're here. You wait there for a little while, and then you can go back to actually enjoying the cruise. So what I hear you say, Tyler, is it's one of those things that you just kind of do because you check the box, but nothing really comes out of it. Nothing's really identified. Maybe it's not implemented in the process in such a way where it actually matters and has an impact, where people are just going, okay, we did this tabletop and then we moved on with our work, which is certainly not how that should work.
Actually, quite the opposite, Sean. What I mean by that is I think in today's versions of tabletops, that's what comes across. Exactly what you're saying. And I think it needs to be gamified. Like, it really could truly be gamified, where you roll, a 1d20. If you roll 1 to 6, the hacker deletes the logs. If you roll 7 through 10, the hacker does lateral movement to another box. Like, you could do such a fun gamified version of that that people would be interested in actually executing, I would think.
Yeah, so Black Hills Information Security, based out of I'm blanking on exactly where it is, but upper northwest. And John Strand's company basically created Backdoors and Breaches. So it's exactly that, the gamification of a tabletop where you do roll dice. I've got some decks of cards here, and there's expansion packs that other companies actually build on and enhance. So that way you can do a tabletop. There's an online version also. So you can do a tabletop where it's gamified. You walk through it. It's kind of like the Dungeons and Dragons where you're rolling, you're getting this up, a hacker does this, but you have the ability to counter with this. So it's kind of fun, it's interesting, but it also gets people thinking about how to really focus on security in the environment and what should be done or what could be done in these scenarios and situations.
Yeah, and I know this topic was originally scheduled to be like breach response, what makes a good breach response and what doesn't, but I think the concepts that we're discussing about preparation leads directly into the original topic, right? And the original topic being, how do you do it better? And one of those ways is prepare.
Yeah. So a good friend of mine, John, who used to run, I don't think he really runs the podcast anymore, but Purple Squad Security was never a huge podcast, but it was one of my favorites because every 10 episodes, he would have hosts from other podcasts on, and he would do like you needed to have dice with you. He would do like a D&D style IR tabletop. And those are some of my favorite episodes. So you can go back through Purple Squad Sec, find all I think basically every 10 episodes for a while there, he would do this. I don't know if it was exactly like episode 10, episode 20, but you can go back and find some of these. And if you want some ideas on how to do like a D&D style tabletop, I think those are some great examples, is when he did some of those episodes.
I found the deck, so Backdoors and Breaches, and then there's a grouping of cards. This is Initial Compromise, so it looks like this, and then you've got a number of other cards, such as the Pivot and Escalate, so what the attacker actually did in the environment. Then it moves on to Persistence, what is the attacker doing once they're in the environment. Then it moves on to the C2 and exfil, and then ultimately the procedures, what you're doing at that point. What is the process that you're going to do? You drop the cards down, you roll the dice, you walk through the process and figure out what this environment looks like, what the attacker is doing in it, and what you can do to kind of fix it or clean it up or get things to a better state. The other part that layers onto that are some of the things that we're talking about, which is how do you communicate? What is your process? What are the contractual requirements? Because if there's contractual requirements or legal requirements, regulatory requirements, as far as reporting on a breach, then those things have to be identified right now. Like your company should be aware of those immediately. So that way, if something does happen, they know how to appropriately respond. Because from the regulatory standpoint, if you have a 24-hour reporting period and you've identified that there is a breach, you've got to make sure that you're inside that window and that you're working with legal to ensure that you have the appropriate response and notification to that authority.
And take events from real life. Sometimes the attacker beats you to the punch, and they're the first ones to release details about the breach. Maybe you didn't realize that the attacker got the CEO's email, and they dumped the CEO's email somewhere. They leak it where everybody can read it. Like there's crazy stuff that happens that's absolutely on the table and should potentially be part of your tabletop to explore.
I think I think we should take this to its logical conclusion and full on LARP this. I will dress like Neo from the Matrix, and I'm bringing my dice, baby. Let's go.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. Thank you for that picture in my head, Tyler. All right. So yeah. So kind of part of my goal here is to discuss some information that companies can use to get better breach notifications. And certainly where I was going to start was left to boom, which is where we are right now. And to quickly explain what that means, so Neil, you created a framework called the Cyber Defense Framework. That's basically a 5x5 grid. And it describes the different phases of, I guess, security preparation and response. And so you have left of boom and right of boom, where boom is some kind of security incident. Maybe it's a breach, maybe it's not. But to left of boom, you have preparation and identification. And that's what we're talking about now, doing tabletops, making sure you know what assets you have, trying to predict what could happen in an incident and preparing, doing everything you can to prepare for that. And then right of boom, you have detection, which maybe you find out that you've had an incident. Maybe the attacker helps you out by publishing something publicly, and that's your detection. That's how you find out. And then your response workflow and then recovery are the last two columns in that 5x5 matrix. So right now we've been talking left of boom, and this is really important because depending on what the attacker releases, like you won't necessarily be able to control the information when things go sideways and you're right of boom. So you want to make sure that whatever picture of your company that people are seeing, that you did a good job of preparation, and it doesn't look like you just completely neglected all the security activities that people would have expected you to do, and that you maybe even said that you did. And certainly plenty of cases where companies clearly didn't walk the walk, didn't do what they said they did, and that'll come out in a lot of the breach details.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you have a situation where the attacker is actually publishing information about the breach. We saw that with Uber. We've seen that with a number of the others have happened in the last year or so, where they're starting to publish information.
All the lapses units, right?
Yeah, the lapses stuff. Lots of lapses stuff, right? That's very interesting to me because before it was basically the attacker didn't want to show their hand and actually show that they've been in the environment. But certainly reasons for breaching a company vary from actually having defacing a website was kind of the old school way of saying, "Hey, I'm here, I'm legit," but that shifted into this model where we have ransomware, we have other threats, we have crimeware, we have situations where there's a lot of different motivations and attackers on the same network often that could be competing. Maybe one is patching something that was vulnerable so that another attack organization can't get access or leverage that environment. We have brokers effectively that are brokering access from one group that is retained access in a large company that's very well known, and then brokering that to another ransomware group that is then dropping something in there and trying to extract some funds, some Bitcoin or whatever from that environment. So it's very interesting to see this situation where things have evolved from the attacker generally stays fairly quiet and the organization themselves can take their time in order to handle that response, to now you almost have to hire a PR firm when you identify something because something has been put out on Twitter or another social media site, and the attacker is starting to show screenshots of internal development systems, internal admin, super user consoles and things like that, where they're going, look, I have access to this. Okay, now you need almost PR level response to handle kind of the blowback of that. And then it becomes okay, well, based on what they're showing, this is this, and it's going to take us a little bit to investigate that and ensure and identify really what is truly the access that they have, or were they kind of just showing something that's more than what it is.
Well, that should be part of your preparation, right? If you're going to use a crisis communications firm, you should already have them on retainer. You should have already talked to them, said, hey, We intend to use you if we have a breach. If you're going to use a third party to help with the breach investigation, are they on your cyber insurance list? Is it somebody that you're even allowed to use if you plan on using your cyber insurance to help pay for this thing? That's something you should already know. Are you going to pay the ransom or not? That's something you should already know. These are all things that if you don't already have planned out, it can look really, really bad for you if you're figuring out the stuff on the fly. And you can generally tell those companies that haven't done the preparation, that don't have a plan for this, because they kind of go through the stages of grief. That they deny that the breach has occurred. They try to keep it from going public. They do all these things that we know don't work, and just make your company look bad. They make you look incompetent. But when you don't have a plan, that's tough. Or anybody with experience going through this, this is something where you've got to be calm, calculated, and just pull out the plan and follow the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. It always looks bad when it goes from there was no breach, nothing important was touched, to, okay, we identified something of value or something that could be sensitive was accessed or viewed, to, okay, yes, something was accessed and copied and pulled off, and that happened to have customer information, but it's encrypted. Okay, well, it wasn't entirely encrypted because we stored the private key in that database.
I think I know what breach you're talking about.
And then they were able to have that also. And now, okay, well, yeah, the attacker actually has all the information about our customers. That kind of level does look very bad, something that can be quite concerning as a customer. Or if it's business to business. I mean, every business has a customer, whether it's the consumer, whether it's the advertiser, whether it's another business, and that's brand recognition, that's reputation, and that can be as bad as losing money directly because the system is offline.
Yeah, so let's use some examples here. Let's get right of breach. The breach has happened. Somehow you found out about it. Maybe you discovered it. Maybe the attacker. There's some claims on social media, and the media is starting to pick it up, starting to write stories about it. And there's definitely some great examples and some not so great examples here. So with Solargate, with SolarWinds, I remember distinctly when FireEye and Mandiant were still one company then. They hadn't been broken into two companies, I don't think, yet at that point. But they came out in day one with most of the details you would want to know on day one of a breach, and tons of IOCs. Like they were prepared with all kinds of details about, if this thing has affected you, here's what they've got. They stole some tools from us. Here's exactly what tools they stole, what those tools did. And they're mostly red team tools, pen testing tools, things like that. I thought that was a great response. Everything I heard about it was very positive. What's your recollection of that, you guys?
Absolutely. So I remember the same thing, Adrian. I thought it was top notch. I think there was a lot of detail pretty quickly. Certainly the folks over at Mandiant, I've know of them, worked with some of them before. It's top notch all across the board. Lots of great information, useful information, actionable information, which is key, especially when you have something on the scale of Solargate, which affected on-prem systems. So just to kind of give some background around what Solargate was, SolarWinds is a tool that's used for monitoring and management in a lot of companies. On their website, they had listed some of the largest companies around the world, including some of the best-known federal government agencies in the United States and elsewhere. So certainly these organizations have been using SolarWinds for managing of their systems. I went through and did some analysis of what SolarWinds actually had as far as product space, and it covered Active Directory, of course, Azure AD, Azure, AWS. It covered SQL on-prem and a lot of other systems, including VMware. So when you start looking at what are your crown jewels in the environment, it's going to be your identity, Active Directory, Azure AD. It's going to be your infrastructure, VMware, Azure, AWS. It's going to be where your data resides, SQL, Oracle, etc. And SolarWinds potentially could have access to all those things, and in most cases, privileged access to those systems. And based on their documentation, most of that was privileged access, admin level or root level access to all of those systems, or most of them. So when you talk about an attacker compromising the SolarWinds code, the source code, and the build process, which is actually what they compromised, was the build process. They didn't necessarily touch the source code, but once the source code goes through the build system turns that into the executables that are then run by the customer, used by the customer. They compromised that, so every time a new build was done, it would include the attacker's code in it and would be able to call back and do what they wanted it to, which effectively turned the SolarWinds agents into C2s, or attacker control agents. So SolarWinds put this up on their auto update. The customers would pull down the auto updates. So this is one of those rare situations where having auto updates and internet updates turned on was a bad thing, because then you got the malicious SolarWinds versions now running in your environment and getting pushed out to all your systems, or at least all of those that SolarWinds was monitoring. So then it was a cascading effect. Active Directory falls, and as well as a lot of your other systems down the line. And you end up with a situation where this attacker has such a target-rich environment where they can pick and choose who they actually want to go in and remotely control and access. So they had a huge range of customers. What was interesting about this is Mandiant wasn't one of those ones that was affected by the actual on-prem SolarWinds component of it, but another element of the attack was the cloud component, going after vulnerable cloud configurations. There's this, at the time, very not well understood thing called partner access, or partner administration, or delegated partner administration through Azure AD, where you could have your tenant, but it could actually be managed by a partner, a cloud service provider, or CSP. And so this is configured typically. The customer or the company would approve the CSP for having this level of access, which is delegated global admin rights or root access to their Azure AD environment. And that's effectively what the attacker did. They jumped into that other environment, that CSP, and then from there they had full admin access to the target that they wanted to go after. And then they started pulling things from there. Microsoft has since provided a better, more granular type of access that they call granular delegated admin configuration. So that's the way to configure that and set that up. We at Trimark, we do assessments of Azure AD environments, and we see this partner configuration pretty rare. It's probably about 5%, maybe as much as 10% of the time. But when you see it, most of the time they are configured with global admin rights into that environment. So it is something that should be checked on a regular basis to ensure that the partner access is appropriate. And the thing that was really interesting about this is when there's a license reseller, which often happens with cloud, that's managing those licenses, they usually get direct automatic access to that environment at that level, at that same level of global admin. So that was the other element of Solargate, which made this very interesting, is you had the on-prem SolarWinds situation, and then you had the same threat actor going after cloud environments through this delegated access. And the delegated access was such that the CSP, they had a bunch of users in those groups. That group that provided global admin rights to their customer environment, it was all their customer environments. There was no way to say, okay, these group of people within our tenant can then manage these specific customer environments. No, it was one to all. And so with granular, it enables a much better limited access, as well as being able to more pick and choose and identify who within that CSP could actually have that access. So this whole thing was prone to vulnerability, so to speak, and the SolarWinds issues, grew and became a big deal. SolarWinds agents end up on domain controllers, so that means Active Directory can be compromised if you can compromise that agent. So yeah, really big deal. And I thought that the great thing about Mandiant providing these IOCs is that meant customers could go through, they could check the version of SolarWinds to make sure that they were not on a vulnerable version. If they were, shut it down, work on cleanup, and ensure that they're blocking those types of activities that were being seen. And the other great thing about it is they said, this is the vulnerable version. If you have the version prior to this, turn off auto updating. So that was great too. So I agree with you, Adrian. It was very helpful.
So I want to ask a question. It sounds like the best practice, and what I want to tease out. Actually, you know what? I don't think I need to ask this question because it's a hot take. I'm going to have Big Head Tyler ask it. Big Head Tyler, for those that can't see this, Big Head Tyler is a massive version of my own head. That's not really me. He wants to know, because it seems like we have a bit of a bias here towards transparency, overly transparent, give the world everything we know, be overly transparent. Is there an appropriate time when transparency is the wrong path and obfuscation or giving just enough data to get by would be the right path? Or are we all in opinion that, hey, no, transparency is almost always going to be the way to go here?
Yeah, I think not being a lawyer, that's a tough one. Some people may have a reason why you don't want to be totally transparent, but uh, every time I see somebody, trying to hide the details, it blows up in their face. Like I can't imagine a really good argument for not going public. Now, certainly that doesn't mean make a bunch of guesses as to what's going on, or try and minimize the problem, or anything like that. Like, if being transparent means, hey, we don't know what's going on yet, but we're investigating, then that's fine. Say that. Don't don't make up a bunch of stuff or tell your customers, yeah, nothing to worry about, if you don't know if there's anything to worry about yet. Too many times we've seen that, where the company is transparent and says, yeah, nothing to see here, no big deal, and then the attacker sees that, and they're like, all right, watch this, and then they
Here, hold
leak
my
some,
beer.
yeah, like that's the worst thing is, this attacker, like nothing bad happened, like, that's how HB Gary Federal got hacked out of existence.
That was a brutal one back in the day.
Yeah, they basically they poked the bear. They said, hey, we're gonna, Anonymous is just a bunch of snot-nosed kids, don't know what they're doing. We're gonna expose them, and boy, that was ugly. That was really, really ugly.
Having been on a lot of different sides of breaches and providing some expertise behind it, I don't do incident response, but have worked with the incident response teams as a subject matter expert in Active Directory and Azure AD. What I've seen in the breaches and the breach responses that I've worked has been, it's a balancing act. You want to provide information. I would say always be clear and direct about what you know and what you don't know, insofar as what you're comfortable with sharing as appropriate. So there are certainly situations where you can potentially share too much because you're working off an assumption or you believe that to be true. Sticking with what you know will often help guide you. So if you know that they were able to compromise these specific systems, and those systems affect customers, that affects credit card data, PCI data, healthcare information, certainly follow the guidelines and rules around that. If you're not certain, follow the rules around if you're not certain. But I would say, again, my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, work closely with your response team to ensure that you have an appropriate response for that, and that you're providing as much accurate and detailed information as possible that you're comfortable with, because you can say too much about something and go, oh, wait, we actually identified that they didn't have access to that, and put up the alarm too early. There's a difference between the attacker probing something, them getting onto a system, them having view access on encrypted data or data sources, to then being able to view it, to then being able to admin it, to then being able to extract it. And each of those different types of accesses require a different type of response. One of the big challenges with a breach is appropriately scoping it in order to get that attacker out of that environment. Scoping the environment, identifying what the attacker has actually been on, what they've been using, what are their tooling. That takes time to identify. Oftentimes the initial response is, let's just kick them out. Let's get them out of there. If you do that before it's appropriately scoped, the attacker will still be there. They have likely embedded something in your environment that they can persist with, and let you see those other things that are a little more obvious. When I worked on breaches, it was more about identifying a few different ways to detect the malicious code that they were using, which is not off the shelf, all custom, and being able to walk through and figure out what those were and what are the activities and behavior in the environment that ties to that attacker sort of behavior and activity. What's interesting is they will shift that over time if they see that you're getting too close to what they're trying to do, and actually get them evicted and get them out of that environment.
Yeah, so let's also talk about tone here. I think tone is really important when you know saying anything publicly about a breach. And so one of my pet peeves is too often I see companies trying to minimize it. Obviously they don't want to scare their investors, their shareholders, but at the same time, it's just it's a bad look to say, oh, it only affected 300 customers, or to say it was only a third party, that we shared all your data with, that got hacked. It wasn't us. Like, we were really secure. It was this third party that we chose to give all your data to. It sounds like you're trying to weasel out of responsibility for it, or you're trying to minimize the impact and the damage that has been done to some customers, and it's just not appreciated. I think you have to be humble. You have to be transparent about the fact that it was a failure. You have to accept responsibility, even if it is a third party. That's still your name attached to it. You chose that third party. It was your job to do due diligence on them. Treat it as if them getting hacked was you getting hacked. I think is the proper way to set that tone.
Yeah. So let me ask another question then, Adrian. In business school, they teach crisis comms. They don't really teach it, right? They don't teach it to you in depth, but they give you the high level TLDR of crisis comms. Your CEO gets caught doing something illegal, drugs downtown or something, and gets arrested. Like, how do you handle that kind of scenario, right? Like pure business crisis comms. How is a breach crisis comm different, or is there any difference between traditional crisis comm and breach crisis comms? The only thing that comes to my mind is the disclosure of information that could lead to further attacks or further issues obviously has to be very much a concern and taken care of. But the traditional crisis comms almost falls in place perfectly here.
Yeah, I mean, you hire Olivia Pope, right?
I think the only difference are the details, right? It's very much like any other crisis comms. The Streisand effect is real, and yeah, you handle it like anything else. Obviously, the fact that it's a cyber attack, a security related attack, affects how you report it and what those details are. But I think overall, the pros and cons, good crisis comms isn't any different from this, as in the whatever version of it that they teach in business school.
And I mean,
CEO doing drugs is a very interesting and specific example. Is that the
well?
Is that what they teach?
Honestly, I was going to jump
MBA school.
No, I was gonna jump to your CEO gets caught with a prostitute, and I thought that would be inappropriately to bring up on this podcast. So I tried to dumb it down, and the first thing that came to mind was CEO doing drugs, and I was like, well, that doesn't work either, but I got to say it. So
yeah, my brain filled in the rest when you said downtown doing drugs. I was like, he left out hookers.
That's where I was going, and I'm like, God, maybe that's inappropriate. Maybe I should put the filter on. But no. I looked up real quickly, like the traditional crisis comms plan, right? Detailed plan, purpose of the plan, activation criteria, procedures, crisis comms team, who's in it, who acts as spokesperson, will there be more than one, who fields media calls, et cetera, et cetera. What are the key messages? Identify the cause of the crisis, provide a brief description of what happened, a timetable for future plans. Communicate compassion for victims of the crisis. Provide suggestions for protection if appropriate. It's literally the same exact playbook for a breach protection or a breach communication.
Yeah, and that compassion and empathy, I think, is key. Like if your goal of the crisis comms is to reassure customers, to try and avoid loss of customers or loss of investor shareholder trust, trust of the board. If you're the CEO and trying to keep your job, there have been a lot of these cases where part of the executive team gets the boot after an event like this. So it's I think empathy is kind of key to this.
Yeah, I agree. There's got to be a conciliatory tone, and responsibility. Taking responsibility is one of the most important things. I mean, we've seen it with celebrities saying something dumb. They have to come out. They do apology tour. they're coached really well on what to say. It's got to feel genuine. It has to feel like it comes from the heart. It's got to feel like they are trying to accept responsibility for their actions and not pawning it off on someone else. The old way of going, well, I'm sorry that you were upset, like that sort of thing. That's not really an apology. Or I just want to apologize. That's not an apology. It's we made a mistake. We accept responsibility for these things that we did, that we chose to do. We're going to do better. Here's how we're going to do better. And I think that's the other thing that helps build confidence is we made this mistake. We've learned from this. This is an older method of how we were doing it, or we forgot about this old development system or server that was still connected. We are, using this new inventory management system, which practically no one does very well as inventory management. So we're going to use this, and then we're going to do this, and then this is what we're looking to do, and we want to keep your trust and we value as a customer and moving down that path. And I think that's the appropriate way to do it. But it is a balancing act because there are certain things that from a legal standpoint, once you say, you can't take that back out of, you can't close that back into the box, get that genie back into the bottle. So there is very much a balance to it. I mean, transparency is good, but you want to make sure you don't get into a situation where you accept or open up more liability than what you need to in that situation, where it's very important to have a solid team involved in that communication, drafting the communication, making sure it's appropriate. So that way you strike the right balance of ensuring that it is a message that is read by the consumer or whoever the customer is, and they go, I got it, I understand. This is what the issue is. I understand the extent of it. I know how it affects me personally. I know what you're doing about it. And so many of the times, like as a consumer, using whatever products that we tend to use or services that are cloud services, we end up with what? A free year of identity monitoring. Like that's helpful. Maybe $5 off the product that they have next year. That's not helpful. So it can feel very tone deaf, but there's definitely ways to ensure that the messaging is written well. And I don't know, maybe ChatGPT can help draft some of these now and say, hey, chatbot, go ahead and write a letter. My company was breached and some consumer records were exposed.
With empathy.
With empathy, yes, with empathy, and throw in a quote by a famous leader like JFK.
Yeah, welcome to layoff writing 101, as we've seen for the last 3-4 months.
Yes, yes.
Yep. Yeah. I think so. Another important point here. There's a few points I want to touch on real quick. One of those, if you're a public company, you're probably going to have to put out an 8K. And that language is going to be very different than maybe the language you want to use for your customers. In a lot of cases, I've seen companies use, reuse that same language. They post to their blog exactly what they post to the 8K, which is I don't think is appropriate language. Like it, what's appropriate for the SEC and what's appropriate for to give your customers confidence is if you can make it work for both, great. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having two different versions of that notification. And also the other thing is it's not just going to be one notification. When Rackspace got hit a couple months ago because they didn't patch Exchange, they were putting out notifications. No, it's not alleged anymore. Their post-mortem, they say, yeah, it was exactly what you thought it was. It was that patch, that patch that Kevin Beaumont said, hey, you want to install this as soon as possible? We didn't install it.
Yeah, managing Exchange is tough. Please don't manage Exchange anymore. Just move to the cloud. And that's what people did. Rackspace had the Exchange in their cloud. So
they killed the product.
Even Rackspace says that we can't manage Exchange. Yeah, we can't manage Exchange. Go to Exchange Online with Microsoft 365. Let Microsoft manage their product. That's very telling.
And the whole, right, but the other point here was the frequency, and that part of Rackspace's company culture is fanatical customer support. They say, and even when they had no new news to update, they would update something just so that you knew that, hey, this is still something we're working on. We're still trying to recover your data. because it took them a while to recover people's mailboxes, but it looked like they eventually got just about everybody's data back to them, and just about everybody back up and running, even though it was not on their product anymore. It was most likely on Microsoft 365. But I think it's a very good example of how to handle a breach. I think Rackspace did a lot of things right, and a few things wrong. I think the main thing wrong was deciding not to patch. I don't know how they came to that conclusion. They were trying to use the easily available URL rewrite mitigation, which people in the public knew was not that hard to evade. And then it took them way too long to say whether or not any of that data was stolen. So coming from them, everything about their response was, we're trying to get your data back. We're trying to make sure you're up and running. But that was like 30,000 small businesses emails. Like, did any of those leak? Yeah. Or are we going to see any of those get leaked and published by attackers? Are those organizations going to be getting individually ransomed? Folks threatening to leak those emails and all that correspondence that got stolen, or did anything get stolen? We didn't know, and they waited way too long to answer that question.
Yeah, as someone who's worked breaches again and worked Exchange, old school Exchange admin here, going back to Exchange 4.0. And then 5 and 5.5 and so on and so forth. The one thing that we focused on was dial tone, getting the system up and running so it could accept email and process email. The next step after that was restoring databases, getting things up and running so mail was accessible and available, getting that migrated over to Microsoft 365. That's a big lift, big effort. So definitely kudos to them. I'm sure they spent a lot of sleepless nights and long weekends getting that going. But from the attacker side, putting on my attacker hat, yes, if I had access to Exchange at that level, I would be pulling every mailbox of interest from every customer out there. I would probably enumerate every domain that was out there that was available, and start pulling mail as quickly as possible, keyword searching and looking for what I could find. And if they had access, then it is very likely that they did that. I don't know. But I would expect as an attacker with that level of access into the Exchange system, setting up a lot of persistence in order to continue and persist, changing permissions so that they can get back in with whatever they need to, even with the patch being deployed. Exchange can be tough to manage, and its permissions are just kind of spider web in throughout Active Directory. If you have Exchange, you have Active Directory. So there is an AD environment there somewhere in Rackspace that was managing this, and the attackers would have moved through there and seen what else they can have access to, identified titles. Titles are often in there as well, and so looking for CEO, CFO, all of the C-level executives, as well as security folks, as well as the contracts folks, anything that would be interesting, pulling email from those. That's what attackers do, and it's very likely that is what could have been done, but I can't speak to what was actually done.
All right, and I think that's all the time that we have for this discussion today. I think this is a great discussion. It's one I've been wanting to have for a while. We will continue to touch on individual incidents as they occur, as they come up, and maybe we'll start rating some of these breaches. Maybe we'll find some way to put together a scoring on how well these companies are doing in their responses. But stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to cover the latest enterprise security news.